Okay, so this is part 2 of the lecture, and I'm going to talk about some contemporary dating over the lifespan. I'm going to talk about several age periods: early adolescence, middle adolescence, emerging adulthood, middle adulthood, and later adulthood. So your textbook discusses 7 functions of dating or involvement with a partner, and I'm not really going to cover those too much, so you definitely need to read and make sure you have a good understanding of what those 7 functions are. Briefly, they are the confirmation of a social self, recreation, companionship, intimacy, and sex, anticipatory socialization, status achievement, mate selection, and health enhancement. So again, I'm not really going to discuss those, but your text goes into them in some detail, so make sure you read them. So dating during early adolescence. So American adolescents typically begin dating around ages 12 to 14, and they date for social status or recreational purposes rather than for partner selection. So these dating relationships also are pretty short-lived, and they tend to only last a few weeks. So again, these are not highly intimate relationships between two people. It's dating to have fun or to, I don't know, social status could be things like popularity in middle school, things like that. But they're not very serious relationships. So in middle adolescence, adolescence dates and dating relationships typically provide companionship. So being able to spend time with a opposite sex or same sex partner. Middle adolescence also provides some of the first experiences with love, intimacy, and sexual experimentation. These relationships, like the relationships in early adolescence, are generally short lived, but they tend to be a little bit longer, so they may last months as opposed to weeks. And these relationships are often carried out in group settings, so there may not be a lot of one-on-one partner time between members of a couple. So dating in emerging adulthood. Here, dating shifts from dating in groups to dating as couples. The focus shifts from recreation or just having fun and doing fun things together to actually obtaining emotional intimacy with the partner. And this can be things, emotional intimacy can be achieved by self-disclosure and um, being vulnerable with the partner and having them support you through something that's emotionally intense. So again, these relationships tend to last a little bit longer than the relationships in early and middle adolescence. Um, these relationships often include sexual intercourse as well, and they sometimes include cohabitation. So this phase is where the going together, going steady stage often occurs. Um, this is typically the stage between dating and formal engagement. This is also young adults and emerging adults tend to ask themselves a lot of questions about their dating relationships and their partners. And some of these questions include things like, who would I enjoy being with here and now? Or, given the kind of person I am, what kind of person do I wish to have as a partner through life? So it's a time for understanding or trying to understand who you are and who is a good compatible partner. This is also a time for experimentation. Um, so trying out different types of partners, um, making mistakes and learning from them, and basically trying to figure out who you're compatible with. And so these kind of things help you make decisions about partnership and dating in the future. So this is also a time when, in the context of being more independent from your family of origin, um, as well as several other big transitions, such as going to college or potentially moving out on your own, or not living with your parents anymore, potentially. And sometimes stress is associated with our development and these transitions. So again, stress can result, from a lot of these things happening at once. So trying to figure out who you are and what you want in a relationship, as well as being more independent and living on your own. And specifically for college students, some of the confluence of some of these things has actually created the context of a hookup culture on college campuses. So I'm going to talk a little hooking up as well. So again, I wrote an encyclopedia chapter on this with Dr. Perlman, and you guys should read that for next week. I believe there will be a quiz on it. So, and I'm not talking about everything that's included in the encyclopedia chapter. I am hitting some key points. But again, you should read it. So hookups, again, are relatively normative among college students. The definition of a hookup is relatively ambiguous, and this is especially when used colloquially. So, for example, someone could say, "Oh, I hooked up with someone," and that being pretty vague, people can interpret it multiple different ways of like what that actually meant. So again, hookups are relatively normative. Approximately 72% of college students surveyed across 20 universities said that they had hooked up at least once. However, of that 72%, most admitted that the hookup was with a friend or acquaintance. So, in the empirical literature, to have a little bit of clarity, when we do research, we have to have one definition, or at least a definition that we use for research. So, one of the frequently used empirical definitions of a hookup is a sexual encounter which may or may not include sexual intercourse, usually occurring on only one occasion between two people who are strangers or brief acquaintances. And so, again, this also may not be exactly how it's used among the college student population, but for research purposes, we can't, it's hard for quantitative research to actually have a very ambiguous definition of a concept. So there's actually some debate in the empirical literature over this definition of a hookup as well. And this actually revolves around two primary issues. And the first of which is the exclusion of friends or acquaintances as hookup partners. And the second is the exclusion of sexual encounters occurring on a consistent basis. And so, as you can see, when 72% of college students are reporting that they've engaged in a hookup, and a lot of those are with a friend and acquaintance, that's often in contrast to some of the definitions used in the empirical literature. For conceptual clarity, they tend to use other terms. So, for example, a friends with benefits relationship is an actual term used in the literature, and that kind of encompasses ongoing or consistent sexual encounters with friends or acquaintances. So there are several factors of college campuses that have promoted a culture of hooking up. These can include things like co-ed dorms, a lack of parental or institutional supervision. There are also some personality characteristics that have been linked with higher rates of participation in hooking up. And these are characteristics such as extroversion, impulsivity, and autonomy. So again, individual characteristics such as extroversion, impulsivity, and autonomy have been linked with higher rates of participation in hooking up, whereas other traits such as conscientiousness and high self-esteem have been linked with the avoidance of hooking up or engaging in hooking up behaviors. Alcohol use is also one of the most frequently cited precursors to a hookup. And this is from what I've read in the research literature, and basically what college students are reporting they're doing before engaging in a hooking up is drinking. So hookups rarely result in the development of a relationship. Some people that I've read have been reported saying that that's something they were thinking about or would have liked to have happened, but that was actually rarely the result of engaging in a hookup. College students also tend to report both positive and negative experiences from hooking up. So on the negative side, both men and women actually reported feeling awkward or weird after hooking up, but women tended to report feeling regretful after hooking up more often than men. So again, when women report feeling regretful after hooking up more than men, this does not mean that there are not emotional consequences for men. This just means that when you compare men and women, the average or mean levels for women are higher than men, so women are reporting more emotional consequences. So two of the strongest predictors of regret following a hookup include engaging in sexual intercourse with someone only one time and engaging in sexual intercourse with someone who was known for less than 24 hours. And so this is kind of, I think, the typical one-night stand that's often portrayed in the media. So these typical one-night stands are often what's predicting the most regret following engaging in one of these hookups. So now we're going to talk about dating in middle adulthood. So dating during this time is often following the separation from a first monogamous relationship or following a divorce or separation. There's a smaller pool of potential partners than in emerging adulthood. And it's often harder to meet people during this time than it is, like, for example, in college. So, when you're in middle adulthood, you don't have the same access to, thousands of other peers that are in your dating range and may have similar interests. So dating during middle adulthood, there's also some issues surrounding children to consider. So when seeking a dating partner at this time, you have to think about, how your children or that your potential partner may have children as well and how that could interact. There are also some issues surrounding ex-partners. Ex-spouses could cause interference or undermine the new potential relationship. There tends to briefer courtships during this phase, during middle adulthood than during emerging adulthood. There's also an increased risk of contracting HIV or contracting a sexually transmitted infection. So there's some advice for dating partners during this time is to always use protection, such as a condom or birth control pills don't protect against sexually transmitted infections. And often by this time, this is because men who newly single women are having sex with have usually had multiple sexual partners by this time. And so, again, that increases the risk for an infection. So, contemporary dating during later adulthood or older adulthood. So, this is often following the death of a spouse or partner. Individuals in older, later adulthood often seek partners for companionship and emotional intimacy that was lost by the death of a spouse. During this time, there also may be some issues surrounding the disapproval from adult children. So adult children may get upset that their parent is moving on from the child's second parent. That could cause some conflict in the parent-child relationship, which could also spill over into the dating relationship.